The first sign was the silence. Where the grasslands usually trembled with distant calls and wing beats, there was only the faint sound of flies circling something unseen. Near the edge of the dry river, a shape lay half-hidden in dust, tawny, still, and wrong. The lioness's flank rose and fell in uneven rhythm. Her fur was matted with sweat and dirt, one paw bent unnaturally beneath her. Flies gathered at the edges of a shallow wound along her shoulder. But it wasn't the injury that drew the man's eyes, it was the trembling behind her. A cub, barely old enough to stand, pressing its tiny body against hers for warmth. The man froze a few paces away. The air between them was heavy with dust and fear. The lioness lifted her head weakly, lips curling just enough to show the edge of a fang. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning born of desperation. He slowly lowered himself to one knee, keeping his hands open, his voice little more than breath. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." The lioness's eyes flickered, gold dimmed by exhaustion. Her chest heaved, and the cub squeaked, pawing at her neck. She turned her head, nudging it closer to her side as if to shield it from the world. Time seemed to stretch, the air thick with tension and the smell of earth and blood. The man could see that she had been struck, perhaps by a territorial fight or a failed hunt. The wound wasn't deep enough to kill, but infection and weakness had already begun their quiet work. He shifted slightly, reaching into his satchel. The lioness's muscles coiled instantly, a low, rasping growl trembling through her body. Then her gaze caught his, steady, tired, searching. In that fragile moment, she saw something in him that wasn't threat. Perhaps it was patience. Perhaps it was mercy. He placed the water bottle on the ground and stepped back. The lioness blinked. Her ears twitched. Slowly, painfully, she dragged her front paw forward and lowered her muzzle to the opening. The cub followed, stumbling over her leg. She drank in shallow gulps, never taking her eyes off the man. Minutes passed in silence. The wind stirred, carrying the faint cry of vultures circling high above. The man knew he could do no more, not without breaking the fragile balance that held them together in that dusty clearing. Then something extraordinary happened. The lioness, trembling and weak, turned her gaze toward him, and with a slow, deliberate movement, nudged her cub forward. The tiny creature stumbled in the dust, mewling softly, its round eyes full of curiosity rather than fear. It stopped a few feet away from the man, blinking in the sunlight. The mother watched, her body motionless except for the steady rhythm of her breathing. It was not surrender. It was trust, raw, trembling, and utterly pure. The man lowered his head in silent understanding. When he finally stepped back, the lioness did not growl. She only followed him with her gaze until he disappeared into the tall grass. Behind him, the cub nuzzled into her neck once more, and the great mother rested her head upon the earth. The sun dipped low, turning the sky to molten gold. Dust rose from the plains, carrying the scent of wildness and survival. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the man paused for a moment, glancing back toward the fading silhouette of the lioness and her cub. He knew she would live. And though no one else would ever witness what had passed between them, the story, the silent courage of a mother's love, would stay with him forever. The first sign was a sound, not a roar, but a faint, trembling whimper carried through the still afternoon heat. The man stopped, his boots sinking slightly into the cracked soil. The savannah stretched endless before him, golden and silent, except for that sound, small, desperate, and raw. He followed it to the edge of a dry riverbed, where the reeds grew high and brittle. There, lying half buried in dust, was a lioness. Her fur was dull, streaked with dried blood. One leg hung at an awkward angle, and her ribs showed through her skin. But her eyes, even clouded with pain, burned with fierce protection. Behind her, a cub crouched low, its fur patchy with dust, its small body pressed tight against hers. The man froze. The air was thick, heavy with fear, heat, and the faint stench of decay. A few vultures circled above, their shadows sweeping across the ground like silent threats. The lioness shifted. A low growl rumbled in her throat, not powerful, but trembling, as if even warning him cost her too much strength. He raised his hands slowly, speaking softly into the hot air. "It's all right. I just want to help." She bared her teeth, then coughed, a harsh, painful sound that ended in a deep breath. The cub whimpered, burying its face into her side. The man saw it then, a jagged wound along her shoulder, deep enough to show the mark of another lion's claw. A fight for territory, perhaps, or food. She had likely been forced away from the pride, too weak to return. He took a cautious step closer. The lioness tensed, tail flicking once. Her body trembled, but she did not attack. She was beyond that, caught between fear and exhaustion, instinct and surrender. The man crouched, lowering a canteen to the ground. The water shimmered in the harsh light. He didn't move closer. He only waited. The cub was the first to move. Its tiny paws shuffled through the dust, sniffing the air. It glanced back at its mother, who gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, or maybe it was only the tremor of her breath. The cub took another step, then another, and finally reached the canteen. The lioness watched, every muscle tight, her gaze flickering between the man and her cub. When the cub began to drink, lapping at the water's edge, something changed in her eyes, something ancient and wordless. She lowered her head, slowly, painfully, and dragged her body forward. The man did not move. Sweat ran down his temples, but he remained still as stone. The lioness reached the water and drank, each sip a small victory over death. Then, with a trembling exhale, she looked up at him, straight into his eyes. In that gaze was everything: fear, pain, gratitude, and the wild, untamed strength of a mother who had refused to give up. The man felt his heart thud heavy in his chest. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind stilled. The vultures drifted farther away. Even the light softened, gold spilling gently over the wounded earth. The lioness nudged her cub closer to her side, then turned her head toward the horizon, toward the distant line of trees where life still waited. She rose shakily to her feet, her injured leg trembling beneath her, but she stood. The man stepped back, giving her space. With one final glance, a silent farewell between two beings who understood one another without a single word, she limped forward. The cub followed, pressing close to her side. Together, they disappeared into the tall grass, their shadows melting into the wild. The man stood there long after they were gone, the sound of their movement fading into the rustle of the savannah. He knew he would never see them again. But in that fleeting moment, beneath the burning sun, something had shifted, a fragile thread of trust between worlds that rarely meet. And though the wilderness closed behind them, the memory of the lioness's courage, her last strength, her silent plea, stayed with him forever. The rains had passed, leaving the earth damp and alive. Green shoots pushed through the cracked riverbed, and herds of antelope grazed nearby. The savannah had awakened again, wild and unbroken. The man walked slowly toward the clearing where he had last seen the mother lion. Dust still clung to the reeds, and the faint scent of life lingered in the warm air. He thought perhaps he had imagined it all, a fleeting encounter in the heat of survival. Then he heard a deep, rolling roar. It carried far across the plains, steady and deliberate. He froze. It was not just any roar, there was something familiar in it, a rhythm he recognized deep in his chest. A rustle in the tall grass drew his eyes. A pride had gathered at the river's edge, 5 lions, sleek and powerful in the afternoon sun. A male watched carefully, while 2 lionesses kept their young close. And among them, slightly apart, was a subadult lion. Lean and alert, his golden fur gleamed under the light. But it was his eyes, sharp, amber, alive, that made the man's heart tighten. The young lion paused at the edge of the pride, muscles tensed, gaze cautious. Something solitary clung to him, something he recognized. The wind shifted, carrying the man's scent. The lion froze, then slowly turned. Their eyes met. The man's breath caught. Those eyes, the same shade of gold, the same quiet fire that had once stared from beneath a sunburned sky. The young lion stepped forward, careful, deliberate. The others lifted their heads but remained calm. He stopped a few paces from the man, on the dry earth still marked with faint grooves from long ago. For a moment, neither moved. Time seemed to stretch, holding them in fragile understanding. The man whispered softly, almost to himself. "You made it." The lion blinked slowly, steady and sure. He lowered his head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. A trace of the trust his mother had shown remained alive in him. The breeze shifted again, rustling grass and carrying distant murmurs of wildlife. One lioness called softly, a low hum that vibrated through the air. The young lion paused, then moved to her side. She brushed his muzzle gently, a gesture of belonging. The man watched, chest tight with relief. The cub had survived. More than that, he had found his place. The sun dipped low, painting the sky crimson and gold. The pride moved into the tall grass, their bodies melting into the shadows of dusk. The young lion was the last to leave. Before disappearing, he turned once, his eyes catching the fading light, and for an instant, it felt as though his mother's courage roared through him. Then he vanished. The man remained by the riverbed, the air alive with the scent of rain and grass. The plains were quiet again, yet full of life. He knew he would not see them again. But the wild had taken back what was always its own. Somewhere beyond the hills, as stars began to glimmer above the savannah, a single roar echoed, not of sorrow, but of freedom. A mother's courage lived on, fierce, golden, eternal. The sun rose low over the savannah, painting the grass in gold and bronze. The young lion, no longer a tiny cub, prowled at the edge of the pride. His muscles had filled in, his coat shining under the light. But each step carried a weight, the untested responsibility of joining the others in the hunt. The pride stirred. The male shifted, stretching his limbs, and the lionesses began moving toward a distant herd grazing in the open plains. The young lion hesitated. His ears twitched, his tail flicked nervously. He remembered the mother who had once shielded him, the courage she had shown when survival was uncertain. That memory pushed him forward, slow but determined. A breeze carried the scent of the herd. Antelope moved with delicate caution, unaware of the danger creeping closer. The pride advanced with quiet precision, paws soft against the damp earth. The young lion stayed at the back at first, watching, learning, waiting. One lioness glanced back, a flicker of encouragement in her amber eyes. The young lion swallowed his fear and stepped closer. His body moved with careful coordination, muscles taut, instincts alert. The herd spotted the pride. Antelope bolted in a burst of panic, hooves pounding the soil. The hunt began. The young lion's heart raced. He darted forward, weaving through the tall grass, paws silent but swift. Each step tested him, tested his resolve. He focused on one small antelope straying from the group. The lioness beside him flinched in anticipation. The young lion crouched, calculating, ears pressed forward, tail low. The memory of his mother's eyes, the trust she had placed in him, gave him strength. With a sudden leap, he lunged. The antelope twisted, darting sideways. The young lion missed by a hair, landing hard on his side. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he rose immediately, shaking the dust from his coat. The pride circled, closing the distance. Another lioness took the lead, and together they cornered the prey. The young lion flanked, muscles coiled, eyes fixed. This time, timing and instinct aligned. The antelope faltered. With a final, coordinated push from the pride, it stumbled and fell. The young lion hesitated only briefly before joining the others. His teeth sank into flesh, and the hunt ended as one. The cub had survived, grown, and proved himself. Breathing heavily, he stepped back, letting the adults claim the spoils. His shoulder throbbed, but his chest swelled with pride. The pride approached him, rubbing their muzzles against his in quiet approval. He lifted his head high, feeling a pulse of connection, the same pulse that had once been his mother's courage. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the plains. The young lion moved with the pride, every step measured and confident. He had faced fear, embraced trust, and survived. For a moment, he paused at the riverbed where his mother had lain. The earth smelled faintly of rain, dust, and memory. He lifted his muzzle and inhaled deeply, imagining the quiet strength of the lioness who had given him life and courage. Then he turned back to the pride. The plains stretched endlessly before him, wild and untamed, filled with challenges he would face one by one. But he would not falter. Not now. Not ever. The young lion stepped forward, paws sinking into soft soil, tail raised. The wind carried the hum of life across the savannah. And in the rhythm of his stride, the echo of his mother's roar carried on, fierce, enduring, and golden. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the plains. The young lion walked near the edge of the pride, tail twitching as he followed the rhythm of the older lions. Every step was careful, alert. The world was no longer a place of training alone, but of real danger. A scent hit him first, sharp and foreign. Another male. Young, strong, and clearly testing the pride's territory. The young lion's muscles tensed. His ears flattened as a low warning rumble ran through the pride. The lionesses shifted, forming a protective line around their cubs. The older males stepped forward, their manes bristling. The young lion froze, remembering his mother, the courage she had shown when faced with threats she could not escape. That memory steadied him. The rival emerged from the tall grass, eyes locked on the pride. He moved with quiet menace, muscles rippling under his dark fur. The young lion's heart hammered. The pride growled as one, a chorus of warning that vibrated through the dry earth. The rival ignored it. He advanced. The young lion hesitated, then stepped forward, placing himself between the intruder and one of the lionesses. His muscles quivered, but he did not retreat. The pride watched, aware of his resolve. A hiss, a growl, then a clash of bodies. Dust swirled around them as the older males engaged, teeth bared, claws flashing. The young lion circled, watching and learning, ready to act if needed. The rival lunged at him briefly. The young lion ducked, twisting to the side, narrowly avoiding sharp claws. Instinct and memory guided him, the reflexes his mother had taught him, the courage she had embedded in him without a word. The older males pressed the rival back, teeth sinking, muscles locking. The young lion saw the moment, waited, and then acted. He pounced at the intruder's flank, teeth sinking into fur, claws scraping the soil. The rival yelped in surprise and turned, retreating under the weight of the pride's coordinated effort. Silence fell once more. The pride circled the young lion, noses brushing his sides, tails flicking in quiet approval. The older male nudged him gently, a gesture that said more than words ever could. The young lion's chest heaved, muscles aching, but his head lifted high. The danger had passed. He had survived his first true test, not alone, but within the strength of the pride. The wind carried the faint scent of dust and dry grass, and he paused at the edge of the clearing. In his mind, he saw his mother's eyes again, steady and golden, and he felt the echo of her courage flowing through him. The sun lowered further, painting the savannah in streaks of red and gold. The pride moved forward together, shadows stretching across the plains. The young lion walked among them, not small and uncertain, but strong, aware, and fearless. For the first time, he understood fully, survival was not just about strength or instinct. It was trust, memory, courage, and the bond that tied him to those who had protected him, taught him, and now accepted him as one of their own. The distant call of a hyena broke the quiet, but he did not flinch. He moved with the pride, tail raised, eyes sharp, every muscle ready. The plains stretched endlessly ahead, wild and untamed. He would face it all, challenges, hunts, dangers, carrying the spirit of his mother and the lessons of the pride. And somewhere in the twilight, the echo of a mother's roar seemed to roll across the plains again, fierce and golden, forever guiding the young lion as he stepped fully into the wild. The morning light spilled across the savannah, turning dew-soaked grass into threads of gold. The young lion had grown, sleek and powerful. His muscles rippled beneath a golden coat, and his amber eyes held a quiet authority. The cub who once stumbled through dust now moved with purpose, attuned to the rhythms of the pride. The pride was restless. The older male stretched in the warmth, yawning and scanning the horizon, while the lionesses groomed one another, ears flicking at every sound. The young lion observed, alert, waiting for the right moment to assert himself. A sudden rustle came from the edge of the tall grass. A small herd of wildebeest grazed, unaware of the predators watching. The older male and lionesses moved with precision, positioning themselves for a coordinated hunt. The young lion stepped forward, muscles taut, every sense sharpened. This was more than a hunt. It was a test of his skill, of his place within the pride. The herd noticed them and bolted. The chase began. Dust rose around the lion's paws as they sprinted across the plains. The young lion kept pace with the older members, matching their rhythm, learning from their timing. A young wildebeest lagged behind. The young lion saw it, calculated, and lunged. His claws sank into the earth as he brought it down. The herd scattered further into the distance. He stood over his catch, chest heaving, muscles trembling. The pride gathered around him, noses nudging, tails brushing. The older male let out a low growl, approval, acknowledgement, respect. The young lion lowered his head in quiet recognition. He was no longer just the cub of a mother who had fought for him. He was a lion in his own right. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the plains, of grass, earth, and life. Somewhere beyond the hills, the echoes of his mother's courage seemed to ripple across the landscape, a memory stitched into his bones. He moved with the pride back to the riverbed, where the earth was softer, touched by recent rains. The cubs of the pride played nearby, tumbling over one another, ears twitching with curiosity. The young lion approached them cautiously. His presence was steady, reassuring, a bridge between the wildness of the adult lions and the innocence of youth. One cub approached, sniffing him boldly. He allowed the gesture, brushing a muzzle gently against it. The cub stumbled back, then turned to play again, leaving the young lion to watch quietly. He had learned patience, trust, and the weight of responsibility. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, the pride rested. Shadows stretched across the plains, long and golden, the wind carrying distant calls of birds and distant herds. The young lion lay down beside the older males, eyes half closed but alert. He felt the pulse of the land beneath him, steady and alive. The savannah was vast, full of challenges, yet he was no longer afraid. Each roar he uttered, each movement he made, carried the imprint of his mother's strength and the lessons of survival. The pride shifted in their sleep, close and protective, and he felt the quiet trust of belonging. He would face the coming nights, the hunts, the rivals, and the unknown with courage. He was no longer just a survivor, he was part of something greater, carrying forward a legacy of courage, trust, and love. As the sky turned to deep orange and violet, he lifted his head, eyes scanning the distant horizon. The wind carried the whisper of a roar, fierce, golden, eternal. It was both memory and promise. And beneath the vast, open sky, the young lion rose fully into his place, a living echo of his mother, fearless and free.